Every parent loves to see their child happy as their playful, rambunctious self. When they're healthy, that's all possible. With appointments available at Seattle Children's, your child can get the compassionate care you expect when they need it. So if your child needs specialty care, make an appointment today, because safe, timely care can make all the difference. Hope, care, cure. Seattle Children's.
Parents and grandparents hear it time and time again. Enjoy every minute because it goes by so quickly. With their first steps, they start imagining, exploring, and dreaming of what's next. You can help put those dreams in motion by saving for college with Washington's 529 plans. The GET program and the Dream Ahead College Investment Plan can help them be ready for wherever their dreams take them. Give the gift of a brighter future today at wastate529.wa.gov.
Every parent loves to see their child happy as their playful, rambunctious self. When they're healthy, that's all possible. With appointments available at Seattle Children's, your child can get the compassionate care you expect when they need it. So if your child needs specialty care, make an appointment today, because safe, timely care can make all the difference. Hope, care, cure. Seattle Children's.
Parents and grandparents hear it time and time again. Enjoy every minute because it goes by so quickly. With their first steps, they start imagining, exploring, and dreaming of what's next. You can help put those dreams in motion by saving for college with Washington's 529 plans. The GET program and the Dream Ahead College Investment Plan can help them be ready for wherever their dreams take them. Give the gift of a brighter future today at wastate529.wa.gov.
Every parent loves to see their child happy as their playful, rambunctious self. When they're healthy, that's all possible. With appointments available at Seattle Children's, your child can get the compassionate care you expect when they need it. So if your child needs specialty care, make an appointment today, because safe, timely care can make all the difference. Hope, care, cure. Seattle Children's.
Parents and grandparents hear it time and time again. Enjoy every minute because it goes by so quickly. With their first steps, they start imagining, exploring, and dreaming of what's next. You can help put those dreams in motion by saving for college with Washington's 529 plans. The GET program and the Dream Ahead College Investment Plan can help them be ready for wherever their dreams take them. Give the gift of a brighter future today at wastate529.wa.gov.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for joining today's Parent Ed Talk with the 80/80 Marriage, Shifting from Fairness to Radical Generosity, featuring authors, husband and wife, Nate and Kaley Klemp. My name's Elaine Sulkin. I'm publisher and CEO of ParentMap, and I am mama to 3, Bubby to 2 little ones. And tonight is really an auspicious evening for us. It's one of the silver linings of the pandemic. We are partnering tonight with Chicago Parent and Metro Parent in Detroit. And I'm born and raised in Chicago. I'm currently right now in Michigan, even though I live in Seattle. And it is just very exciting to have this partnership. So for those of you not familiar with ParentMap, we are a content-rich resource devoted to assisting you on your parenting journey. We like to define the content that we produce as being somewhere between broccoli and popcorn, broccoli being the more serious health and development, wellness. Marriage, we'll say, falls in the middle because it should be a lot of fun. And popcorn being the out and about adventures and fabulous things you can do, whether you're in Seattle, Detroit, or Chicago. So we welcome you. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping rules just to share with you. So tonight's webinar is going to be recorded for future use, and anybody who registered, parents are really busy. So anybody who registered will have the recording sent to them. We invite you to send Q&A. There's an icon at the bottom of your screen. Please use that. And then following the conversation tonight, we will be in breakout sessions that are facilitated by the community of mindful parenting, and participants can explore how they can apply the Klemps model to their own relationship and what shared success really looks like. How to best stay in alignment with your partner, and how to plan for rupture and repair. So we hope you'll join us for the breakout sessions. They've been wonderful so far, and we encourage you to do that. If you wish to participate in the breakout sessions, please click on the Zoom meeting link that our team will send you through Zoom chat after the end of the presentation. Attendees will be assigned to breakout rooms, and it'll all be pretty seamless and obvious. We also want to thank, we couldn't do this without our partners and our sponsors. So our presenting sponsor, Seattle Children's Hospital, along with our Parent Live sponsors, Washington College Savings Plan and WA 529. People in Washington know what that is. Pacific Medical Centers, and the community of mindful parenting. Nate Klemp is a writer, philosopher, and entrepreneur. Nate and his wife, Kaley, co-authored the newly released book, The 80/80 Marriage, a new model for a happier, stronger marriage. He is also the co-author with Eric Langshire of the New York Times bestseller, Start Here, Master the Lifelong Habit of Well-Being, and is a regular contributor to Inc. magazine, Fast Company, and Mindful. He's a founding partner at Mindful, one of the world's largest mindfulness media and training companies. Nate also holds a BA and MA in philosophy from Stanford and a doctorate from Princeton. Kaley is also one of the nation's leading experts on small group dynamics and leadership development, a TEDx speaker, and the author of 3 other books, including Amazon bestseller, The 15 Commitments to Conscious Leadership, The Drama-Free Office, and 13 Guidelines for Effective Teams. Kaley is a graduate of Stanford, where she earned a BA in International Relations and an MA in Sociology with a focus on organizational behavior. It is truly my pleasure and joy to welcome you guys tonight, Nate and Kaley.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here with all of you. And before we begin, we just want to thank ParentMap in Seattle for all of the work that went into hosting this event. We want to thank Chicago Parent, Metro Parent in Detroit for bringing us all together. We're in Boulder, Colorado right now, but it's kind of amazing to think about all the different places that this group
We've got every time zone represented.
We do have every time zone, yeah. So we thought we would begin with a story, but before we get there, I just want to give you a kind of roadmap of where we're headed. We wrote a book called The 80-80 Marriage. We're going to talk about some of the key ideas from that book, but we want to make sure you leave tonight with something more than ideas. We want to make sure you leave with some actual practices, some tactics and strategies that you can take into your everyday life, so that this isn't one of those webinars you go to and you learn a couple ideas and you forget about in 2 weeks. We really want this to give you some actionable tools that you can weave into your everyday life. So that's where we're going to go. But we thought before we started unpacking some of these tools that we'd tell you a little bit about our story, because that kind of sets the stage for why we wrote this book in the first place. So we're going to give you 2 versions of the story. The first is what we consider the Instagram feed version. And that goes something like this. Kaley and I met when we were 17. You can see the picture on the left. Will you go to prom with me? This is actually...
That really happened.
That really happened. We met at Boulder High School. We were chemistry lab partners. We started dating for about 5 months. The middle picture is actually us at prom. That's our senior prom picture. We dated for about 5 months, but then just before we were going to go to college, even though we were going to the same college, we decided, hey, we're too young. Let's be pragmatic. If it was meant to be, it'll come back. And so when we were 24 years old, it did. We got engaged. That's the picture on the right. And we got married at 26. And then we had a kid and we moved back to our hometown of Boulder and lived happily ever after. So that would be the Instagram story of our life and why we decided to write this book on marriage. Now, that's not the real story. And so we want to give you a second version of what actually happened. So about a year into marriage, we hit a wall, really. I was in my final year of my PhD. We were biking on a path. I had a very bad bike accident where I fell on my head. About a month later, I started experiencing all sorts of crazy symptoms. So I was like dizzy all the time. I had this crazy ringing in my ear that would go from one ear to the other ear. And about 2 months or 3 months later, I started to feel this incredible fatigue. I mean, I could just barely make it through the day, barely make it through the work that I needed to do. And then 3 or 4 months later, all sorts of anxiety and depression started to set in. And I went from being this energetic Princeton grad student to just barely making it through my life. And it all kind of came to a head one day where Kaley was on a business trip. She had called me and asked me to pick her up at the airport. And it's very difficult to describe if you've never experienced something like this, but the thought in that moment of driving 50 minutes to go to the airport was like so overwhelming and just felt, every part of me felt I can't do that. So I told her, I'm sorry, I can't pick you up at the airport. And so fast forward to that evening, I'll never forget, we were sitting on her parents' couch and this is a year into marriage. Kaley basically told me, I can't do this. This isn't working. And in that moment, here we went from this kind of like perfect fairy tale to this situation where we were on the verge of divorce. And I remember thinking, this is so unfair. Here I am dealing with something that was totally out of my control. I feel completely like misunderstood, and this isn't fair.
Now, simultaneously, you can imagine I have figured out how to get myself home from the airport after what seemed like a small request, after a long business trip, working for our family. And sitting on that couch, it felt to me like it was incredibly unfair. I was doing so much work, over contributing, doing everything for our relationship, and you couldn't even pick me up at the airport. Now, thankfully, we made it through that crucible, and a lot of gratitude to Nate's meditation and yoga practice. But even on the other side of that acute moment, we started to notice that this question of fairness was underlying most of our fights. There were tiny things like, wait a second, I'm going to the grocery store again? That's not fair. It's your turn. To things that were a little bigger. How come we're spending the holidays with your family again? They get another one? That's not fair. To things like, wait a minute, I'm doing more. I'm working harder and traveling harder and earning more for our family, and that's not fair. And so as we kept progressing, there was a resentment that kept building up inside of me around all these things that felt like they weren't fair. Then the next crucible moment for us was really when our daughter was born. And in that moment, all of my coping strategies, all of the over-contribution, it broke. There was nothing more that I could do. And this tug of war around who was doing more, who was trying harder, fell apart. And so it was really in that experience of having a kid. And so coming to ParentMap, it feels like we imagine you all understand this, where it felt like there has to be a different way. Because if we try to litigate what's fair throughout this relationship, we're not going to make it. And so in this quest to find, against the modern context, how can we be equals and in love, that we started this journey to write the 80-80 marriage.
Yeah, and really our first step on this journey was to figure out, okay, this model that we have isn't working. The model of our parents and our grandparents, that's not going to work for us either. We don't want to go back to the 1950s. So what are the models that work, and what are we up against as modern couples? So to solve that problem, we decided to become kind of like anthropologists of marriage. So we interviewed about 100 people, couples from all sorts of different walks of life. And really, we were trying to find out two things. One, we wanted to find out what are their pain points? What are the challenges they experience? And two, what are the solutions? What's working? What are the structural and mindset elements that make this thing work in the modern age? And so to the first point, what are the challenges? I mean, it was fascinating. We actually got a bunch of questions in advance from many of you.
Yes.
And it was so interesting to see. I mean, it almost took us back to these interviews because we heard about all sorts of different things. But I think one of the common through lines is this idea of somehow things are not quite fair. Mm-hmm. And there are all sorts of different dimensions to that we're going to explore later. In terms of the solutions, what we found when we talked to couples, especially those who were thriving and really doing well, is that there was a way of thinking in marriage. There was a mindset. There was like a spirit of contribution, which we call radical generosity. We're going to explore that a lot more. And there was also a structure of, rather than being two individuals sort of fighting against each other, competing against each other, they expressed a sentiment of being a team together. And that's how they structured their life.
So both from the interviews and from the questions that we saw from some of you, and we're excited to do Q&A with you a little bit later tonight. If any of these things ring true for you, you are in the right place. The 80-80 marriage has some answers, some practices, some exercises that can really help you. If you and your partner are in a conversation where it feels like we just don't have enough time for each other, we get to the end of the day and we intend to connect, but we are just too tired, The 80-80 marriage has some ideas around boundaries that you can set and ways that you can reprioritize your relationship in a way that isn't magical or idealistic. If you and your partner are in a situation where it feels like, gosh, I mean, we love each other, but we haven't had the conversations that we did when we were dating. Where is that spark? The idea of setting aside time, asking different questions, connecting on that deeper level, that is part of what we are up to. And then also, if this notion of fairness resonates with you, whether it's domestically, where it's, hey, wait a second, how come I'm taking care of the kids again? Or whether it's other places in your life, those are some of the questions that we want to make sure that we look at tonight and that we also explore in greater depth in the book.
Okay, so we want to get to radical generosity and this new model that we've put forward in the 80-80 marriage. But before we do, I think it's worth going a little bit deeper into this idea we keep talking about of fairness and 50-50. What does that mean and why doesn't it work? And so here you can see this is kind of like the starting point. I like to think of this as the cultural center of gravity in marriage, that for whatever reason, our generation seems to be locked in this mindset. This is kind of like the default habit of our mind in marriage. And it's basically this idea that if we want to be equals and in love, which is the modern aspiration of marriage, the best way to get there is to make everything perfectly 50-50 fair. And not only that, but the way we're going to do that is we're going to keep a mental tally of all the amazing things that I've done. And Kaley's going to keep a tally of all the things that she's done. We're going to compare those against each other. And the thought is that somehow if we can make everything perfectly fair, we will all of a sudden experience this, instantaneous marital bliss. Now, we took this model to its very extreme. We pressure tested this for about a decade or so. Didn't work for us. We interviewed a lot of people, didn't work for them. And so now we want to kind of get into how this shows up and what this looks like.
And tonight's point, it was really interesting that if we asked couples in our interviews, hey, do you ever fight about fairness? They would say, not really. No. But then throughout their stories, they would reveal it. So we want to give you 4 faces of fairness. Now, there are others that we talk about in the book, but just for tonight, the first one that we want to talk about is the domestic fairness fight, the domestic scorekeeping fight. Now, this can show up as it's written here where, wait a second, I just waited around for several hours for the cable guy. You can't drive to ballet. That's not fair. Or it could also look like, wait a second, when I make dinner, I clean as I go. I leave you maybe one dish. When you cook dinner, the kitchen's a disaster. That's not fair.
So there's a second fight, and we are very familiar with this fight. I wonder if it shows up for you at all. We call this the friends and extended family fight. And the way this would show up for us, we used to live in California and both sets of parents lived in Colorado. So when we would come back for the holidays, we would come up with these exquisite 50-50 bargains about, okay, we're going to spend, 2 days at my parents' house, but it's going to be Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. So we're going to do 3 days at Kaley's parents' house because they missed Christmas, so they get a bonus day. So we'd have these elaborate schemes of how to make everything fair. But then there would be this hour of transition between the two houses. And we would get in these huge fights over like whether we're going to leave at 6:30 or whether we're going to leave at 7 or 7:30. So anyway, even if you get close to fairness here, it just goes to show that there's still always room for conflict in this paradigm.
Third face of fairness that we heard quite a bit in interviews was around money. Money is often a contentious subject in marriage and in relationships. So the it's not fair would show up around, hey, wait a second. We agreed that we were saving for a down payment on a new house. And what are you doing with new golf clubs? That's not fair.
And the last one is one of my personal favorites. We call it the free time fight. This is one that I think you are all probably familiar with. This shows up the moment you bring your child home from the hospital. And once you add more kids, you get more of this fight. And it's basically this fight over who has more free time. We were talking to one woman in one of our interviews, and she was talking about how she went to Target by herself to buy a bunch of stuff. She got back and her husband was like, hey, so now that you've had your free time, I'm going to go for a run. And that obviously led to a big fight because she was like, wait a minute, I was at Target buying a bunch of stuff for the family. That's not my free time, right? So that's just another case of how this conflict is almost impossible to resolve.
And so our invitation for you is to make this real. If you're attending with your partner, invite the two of you just to take 30 seconds or so, if you haven't been while we've been talking, and just reflect. How does fairness show up for you? Again, as we've explored this with other couples, the ones that we've illustrated may or may not be the ones that are specific for you. The value of knowing how fairness shows up is it gives you a clue as to when there might be opportunities in the future to make a shift. All right, so why doesn't fairness work?
Yes. So this is probably my favorite set of insights that we came across in writing this book. When we started thinking more about this question, we went to the literature on psychology and family studies, and we wanted to look at what happens when we try to make things fair and why doesn't that work? And it turns out that there's a real problem here, that fairness is almost like a mirage in the desert, right? That we think if we just get close enough to it, that we'll finally get there. But the closer we get to it, the further it recedes off into the distance. And there are two reasons for this, both rooted in psychology. Basically, when it comes to our assessments of what is or isn't fair, our judgment and our perception is totally distorted by these cognitive biases. The first is what psychologists call availability bias. And that's just a fancy way of saying that all of my contributions, all the wonderful things that I do for you and for our family, Kaley, those are all totally available to me. Like I can see all the dishes I loaded into the dishwasher and the morning pickups or drop-offs for our daughter. But when it comes to what Kaley does, I don't know. I mean, I see some of it, right?
But that midnight snuggle when one of the kids was upset that required some soothing, he slept through that. He never saw it. I am intimately familiar with the several hours of sleep that I did not have.
Exactly. So as a result, I systematically underestimate what Kaley does because that information is just not available to me. So then the problem gets even worse because psychologists have found that not only are we underestimating what our partner does, we are overestimating our own contributions. And what I think is really interesting about this is it turns out we're really bad at estimating the amount of time we spend on childcare and domestic work. That we're actually pretty good when we're at the office at estimating how much time we spent writing a report. But when it comes to childcare and housework, it's so choppy and discontinuous that we tend to just say, yeah, I was in the kitchen for 3 hours cleaning up when it was like 90 minutes. So I think that's all just so interesting because what it means is that we are systematically overestimating what we do, underestimating what our partner does. Then we're having these fights and conflicts over who's doing more, who cares more, who's trying harder. And it's all based on pure delusion, right? Like we are using the worst possible data to have these conflicts. And that's why they never go away. That's why they just stay around.
So there has to be a better way. And through these interviews, through this research, we think that the 80-80 marriage is it. And to really understand the 80-80 marriage is to understand two components. The first is mindset. How am I thinking? How am I perceiving? How am I behaving? How do I perceive my relationship? That's the mindset. And the big shift here is from fairness, that hopefully you are now also persuaded doesn't work, and into a mindset of radical generosity. And we realize the math does not work, but the idea here is that your spirit of contribution is to give 80%. The likelihood that you'll actually make it to 80% is actually quite low, but it's through the intention that so much shifts. The second is really about structure. What are the practices? What are the ways that you implement? What are the pragmatic realities that this mindset of radical generosity makes possible in the world? And really that second piece shifts us out of I win or you win to instead we win together. That now we're genuinely a team and we experience shared success. The metaphor that's really resonated with me recently is that of a tug of war. That in fairness, the idea is it's 50-50. There's that arbitrary line right in the middle, and I'm going to pull on my side of the rope as hard as I can. Whereas when we shift to this mindset of radical generosity, we drop the rope. In that mindset of radical generosity, we stop keeping track. We stop keeping score. And instead, we look to our partner to say, how can I contribute, appreciate, reveal so that we win together? Instead of fighting against, we're actually a team.
Okay, so I'm guessing somewhere around half of you right now are saying, that sounds really interesting, but how does that actually show up in real life? This sounds like some sort of weird marital utopia. How is this possible? How can I do this? How do you make this practical, essentially? And so what we want to do now is kind of walk you through 3 elements of radical generosity. And we want to get really tactical here so that we're not just giving you ideas, we're giving you things that you can actually do that don't actually take much time. They might take a little bit of mental effort in terms of remembering them, and you might have to move into a little bit of discomfort. But these are 3 things that compose this mindset of radical generosity. So it starts with contribution. We think of this as what you do in marriage. And when you think about contribution, a lot of people have a tendency to think about these like really big, amazing things like, setting up a trip for your spouse or an hour-long back massage or something like that.
I would accept that.
Which it would be a nice thing to do. But we actually think some of the more powerful ones and certainly more time-efficient acts of contribution are little things,
yes.
Right? So when you get up, turning on the coffee pot for your partner, or putting a Post-it note on their desk that says, I love you. Mm-hmm. One of the great stories we had in the launch of this book, there was a pretty well-known venture investor named Brad Feld who wrote a blog on the 80-80 marriage. And what he said was after he read the book, he was on a call and he had noticed the night before that his wife, Amy, was struggling with her yarn. She's a knitter and her yarn got all tangled up. So during one of his calls, he went into his wife's sewing room and he spent like 10 or 15 minutes just untangling this yarn. And you would have thought that he like cured cancer or something. She was so excited. And it was just a very small act of contribution. But it's the kind of thing that has the potential to create a contagious upward spiral where your partner is then more likely to contribute back.
And so we would like to invite you to now consider what is one radically generous contribution that you could do for your partner. Now, again, I think that sometimes small things are incredibly powerful. This could be one radically generous act is listening with your full attention as your partner shares about their day. This could also be something like writing them a sticky note that says, I love you. And in our family, it's been really fun. Our 9-year-old has gotten totally excited about the sticky note, I love you, that will now find them anywhere she thinks we might be. So I'll come down to my computer and find an I love you sticky note from our daughter, an I love you sticky note on the steering wheel. There was also an I love you sticky note in the bathroom. That one didn't go that well, so I recommend against it. But the idea is, how can you contribute to your partner? Now, pro tip, we say, try not to get caught. And what we really mean is, for instance, if a radically generous act you could do is to unload the dishwasher, it will mean more to your partner if they just discover it completed versus if there's an announcement. Just in case you were wondering, I'm unloading the dishwasher now. This is A+ silverware drawer game. So Write a note to yourself. Hopefully we've stalled long enough. A radically generous act of contribution you could do for your partner, hopefully in the next 24 hours. And for extra credit, don't get caught. Part 2 of the radically generous mindset is really about appreciation. And so we think about contribution is what you do, appreciation is what you see. In some ways, you could think about these as the glasses that you wear in your marriage, that what you are looking for, you will find. So if you're wearing glasses where you're looking for ways that your partner fell short, or if you're looking for the ways that your partner doesn't care as much as you do, or where they messed up, you will definitely find them. And yet, if you go looking, almost like a scavenger hunt, for all the ways that your partner is awesome, if you go looking for the subtle and significant ways that they contribute to your life and thank them for it, it's amazing what you will also start to notice. And so as part of the 80-80 mindset, we encourage you to appreciate your partner. Again, noticing things like, it was amazing how patient you were with our child when they were trying to log into Google Classroom and were so frustrated. Or, hey, I noticed that you relined the trash can when I was taking out the trash. That was so kind. Thank you. Little things or big things are worth noticing and appreciating. And so again, we want to give you a chance to practice. That if you are with your partner right now, we invite you to turn to your partner and offer them an appreciation. Some ideas are on your screen. It could be things they do around the house. It could be kind actions. It could be emotional labor. It could be something that happened today or last week. If you're not with your partner at this moment, I invite you to pull out your phone and text them an appreciation. One of my favorite things during this exercise is watching people's faces. And if you've run out of time to give your partner the full appreciation that they deserve, we encourage you to pick up this practice again later.
And one note on this practice, for some people, this idea of doing appreciation, especially in this kind of formal way where we're saying, go appreciate your spouse, it can feel uncomfortable and it can feel kind of awkward. And I just want to say, if you feel that, that's totally fine. One of the things we found in this model is that sometimes shifting from fairness to radical generosity and contribution and appreciation, it does feel uncomfortable and it does feel slightly awkward. And I would just say that if you're feeling that, that's a good thing. It's a good sign. And just see if you can move into that discomfort, because it does go away and the rewards are so amazing that it's worth it.
Yeah. For many of the questions that we saw from people, from the interviews that we saw, this becomes a foundational piece. Contribution and appreciation, that call and response, it changes the tenor of the relationship and becomes something that you can build on.
Yeah. So there's one other element to this mindset of radical generosity that's really important, because contribution and appreciation, they're amazing. In the book, we talk about it kind of like music, like a call and response, where one act of contribution then elicits the response of appreciation. And it creates this upward spiral effect where, you just get more and more radically generous as a couple. It transforms the culture of marriage. And you might be thinking to yourself like, oh, wow, that sounds amazing, but also too good to be true. I mean, come on, really? Like, is that possible? And I think, yes, it is possible. We found it in our interviews. We've experienced it in our own life. And sometimes that whole system breaks down. Sometimes the music of call and response, of contribution and appreciation sounds less like Mozart and sounds a lot more like some sort of crazy free jazz that makes no sense. So you may be experiencing that in your own life, or you may be saying to yourself, look, my relationship is so out of balance. I do so much more contribution and appreciation that this will never work. What do you have for me? Right? And so that's where this final element of radical generosity comes in. And it's the idea of revealing. We think of this as what you say in marriage. And there are really two pieces to this. So the first piece is about revealing your full experience of your life to your partner as a way of staying in connection with each other. So this is revealing what's happening in your inner world, some of the emotions you're feeling, some of the difficulties you might have in parenting or at work. This is a way of being known and being connected with your partner. And a lot of couples in the questions they submitted said, look, this is something we're really struggling with. We are not revealing these things to each other. So there are all sorts of questions we can talk about that help you open up those conversations. But that's piece one. Piece two is revealing those inevitable moments in marriage and relationships where you feel misunderstood or out of sync with your partner or disconnected. And that's where, for example, if you feel like, hey, this would never work, my partner's not doing enough, or I request things and they never do it, revealing becomes a really powerful tool. And we have a tool in the book that we call Reveal and Request, which basically is sort of an invitation to reveal your authentic experience. So, hey, I feel frustrated. And to give your partner a request. Next time, I'd really like it if you did X. And just to give you an example, Kaley the other day was like really busy. She didn't have time to go mail this thing at FedEx. And so I told her, hey, I'd be happy to do that. I've got a pretty light day. Kind. And so she put everything on the bench in front of our door and just gave me the address. And meanwhile, she's in all these really important meetings. And I actually got really frustrated because I was sitting there thinking, like, I have no idea whether these are all going to the same place. Do you want to do FedEx? Because you put it in USPS postal envelopes. That's confusing to me. Most important, though, when do you want this to be there? I have no idea when to send this or when the deadline is. So that led to a reveal where I said, look, I was trying to help. I felt really frustrated. Next time my request is, can you please think through the things that I need to know if I'm going to do something like this? And the key is to really do that from a spirit of radical generosity.
Yep. And it can be things that are kind, like trying to do your partner a favor. It can also be if there's anyone here who feels like, gosh, I feel taken for granted, or I feel like I'm doing so much more than my partner. This can be a really powerful tool. The key is, are you revealing as a gift to the relationship? Are you doing so from that mindset of radical generosity? Because it lands so differently. If I say to my partner, let's imagine that I've done the 20th load of laundry and I'm starting to feel resentful, it lands really differently if it's, hey, what do you think? That there are elves that live in our laundry room? Versus, hey, I notice I'm feeling really taken for granted that somehow magically clean laundry appears every day. My request is, could you do a load or two? Right? The person on the other side goes, oh, I could respond to that. So paying attention to patterns, paying attention to tone, paying attention to revealing, and then making clean requests. For tonight, though, we want to go back to this idea of getting to know your partner again. That one of the things we heard in our interviews from several people, and was reflected also in some of your questions, is it's not that things are bad. It's not that things are broken. It's that, gosh, by the end of the day, we are just so exhausted that we both sit in bed on our phones, we scroll our Instagram, or we scroll our news, or we read our book. We aren't really checking in with each other. And date night ends up being kind of a tag up on logistics and what's on our Costco list. So for now, we want to invite you into a question of revealing. That if you're in that place where it feels like you want to be more connected with your partner, shifting the kinds of questions that you ask can make a big difference. So if you're here with your partner, invite you for the next 2 minutes to have a conversation about what's really going on with you. Where are you experiencing emotion, whether joy or sadness, irritation or creativity, anxiety? What's really going on? And if you're not here with your partner, invite you to check in with yourself, even just to give yourself a moment to reflect. What's really going on with you? And could there be an opportunity for you to share that with your partner in the near future? If you are the partner listening, I encourage you to listen with full presence, with radical generosity, like you would if this were a first date.
Hello.
Hi.
On behalf of everyone who's listening, I didn't come in too soon, did I?
You're a little early. Can we have 3 more minutes?
Of course. Okay, I thought there was, I'm sorry.
You're good. No, you're good, Elaine. And so we want to transition from mindset into structure. We want to help you bring these ideas, right? And the practices around how to shift your mindset, contribution, appreciation, revealing, those lay the foundation to then be able to do some of the more pragmatic aspects of your life. And so the 80-80 structure is really about shared success.
Yeah. So basically, what we want to do is just give you a little teaser here. We can't go through all of these practices, but they're practices you can find out more about them in the book. But the idea here, as Kaley mentioned, is that you have this mindset of radical generosity. That is really the starting point to changing the underlying culture of marriage. But then there's this question of, okay, like, what about all the logistics and the organizational pieces? And, how do we manage just the demands of modern life? And that's really where these structural elements come in. So there's 5 different pieces that we explore in the book. One of them is around roles. This is so powerful to get really clear and intentional on who does what. Because we're coming out of this 50-50 mindset where everybody in a relationship is equally capable of doing everything. And it results in total confusion and a lot of drama for couples. So you've got roles. But the other thing that's really key is to start thinking about what are your priorities? So what are the things you want to say yes to in life? Because if you say yes to everything, all of a sudden you basically have no priorities. The world is kind of creating your priorities for you. And then there are boundaries. What's your no? What are the things you say no to make sure that you have a little bit of time together, that you can connect, that you can reveal to each other? And then the final 2 are some of my favorites. Power. So thinking about how are we organizing our life in ways where power is imbalanced, and how can we create a little bit more structure to bring those areas into balance? These are things like money, saving, spending, domestic work, etc. And then the final one is sex. And you might be like, wow, sex shows up under the structure of life? That's weird. Well, that was one of the most interesting insights that we found in this research, is that for most couples, the way you do life and the tensions that show up at line in Costco also tend to show up in the bedroom. So there's this real connection with the ability to manage life together in a way that's shared success and radically generous, and the way things show up in the bedroom.
So we want to give you an invitation for your breakout rooms. We hope that everyone here will join a breakout room and have a conversation. That what we found in our interviews is that the foundation to being able to do shared success is about sharing values. And there aren't kind of good values or bad values. It's really just knowing what they are for this chapter of your life. So for instance, we interviewed couples who said, hey, this chapter of our life is about financial stability and about creating a strong education for our kids. Fabulous. Other couples who said, hey, our kids are teens. This era is really about launching them and reconnecting as a couple. Or one of my favorite interviews was with a couple called the Honey Trekkers, who I believe are on year 9 of their honeymoon, who sold all of their possessions and before it was cool, got a Sprinter van and are traveling around the world. Now, these values in some ways preclude the others. You can't be on a permanent honeymoon and be creating, savings for your kids to go to college, at least not for most couples. Right? Similarly, you can't be devoting your life to philanthropy and service while you're also making sure that you're growing your own financial stability as a person. So it's worth getting clear, what are the values for this chapter of your life? And so in the breakout sessions that we know are coming, we want to invite you to explore those, to share them with your partner, to make sure that you're aligned. Because from these values, the other exercises start to become more clear. So as Nate was describing, there are exercises around how do you do roles? Well, it makes sense to define your roles based on what are you trying to achieve? What are the values that help you orient? What's that North Star? Or one of my favorite exercises around priorities. We think about life like a report card. What grades do you want to get in the different categories of life? Where do you want A's versus where do you want to give yourself permission to get a D-? And by knowing that in alignment with your values, you make good choices. Boundaries we think about is what's on your boat. Also one of my favorite exercises in the book, where you imagine your life like a boat and you put on the boat all the different things that you're trying to do. And it's interesting to notice how for many of us, the water line is very near the top and it starts to feel familiar. Oh, I get why it feels like I'm nearly drowning so often. And so with that insight, you can make choices around what do you want to throw off your boat? Power is about, can you trade? Can you do a swap? Can you even get clear about how power shows up in your relationship? And well, orgasmic altruism, you have to read the book for that one.
So I would just end, we're going to go to Q&A in a second, but I think one of the most important ideas we came across in the research for the book and all the interviews for the book is that, we call 80-80 a model, and that's true. It's a model, it's a set of ideas. But most important, this is a practice. And so, we've given you a bunch of ideas here. We've done some exercises here, but this is really something that you can practice, you can build these habits over time. And that's how you actually experience real change. If it's just an idea, you'll probably forget about all this in 2 weeks and go back to your everyday life. So if you're interested in continuing the practice, one really good place to start is the book. We've been talking about how all of these practices anchor back into the book. We also do a free weekly newsletter where we take a specific topic in marriage and we talk about 3 tips or tools you can use. And then we're also on Instagram where we're constantly, doing sort of daily challenges and experiments and tips and that sort of thing. So our website is 8080marriage.com. And we're at Instagram at 8080marriage. You can find us there if you want to continue this kind of daily or weekly version of the practice.
And just from what we've covered tonight, here are a few ideas that you can put into practice. That contribution you wrote down, keep doing the appreciation that you did tonight. You might reveal, have that deeper conversation tonight before you go to sleep, and then also to explore your values in that breakout session. And with that, we would love to have a conversation about some of your questions that showed up in the chat.
Fantastic. I can't thank you both enough. There's one fact when we sit around the table and we talk about what kind of speakers we should have. The universal nod is always towards relationship, because I always say the best gift that we can give our kids is a relationship of love and representing what that means in our values is everything. So thank you for this. There are a ton of questions. So I'm going to kind of do a mashup on some of these questions. How do we get back the spark when we are constantly tired, always with our kids? Kids are fighting. I'm going to throw in a tough one when it's also laced with issues around lies and infidelity. That might be, you might have to break those out. There's a lot of questions around just sheer fatigue and talking about priorities and what's going to go. So we'll start with that.
Yes. So this is such a good question. And as you're saying, so many people really wrestle with it. I think there's in some ways 3 pieces to this question. The first is really around giving yourself permission and making a choice that your relationship with your partner is a priority. And once you've said, because there's a nod, like, well, of course it is. But once you say, no, this matters to me. And I love the way that you framed it, that one of the greatest gifts we can give our children is love between us and our partner. If you say this is a priority, then it's a willingness to say no to a couple of the other things that vie for your attention so that you can carve out some space. Because that connection, that depth, that spark, it happens when there's some space, when you can take a deep breath, have some head space, really be present with your partner, and then you get to explore some of the things that are meaningful to the two of you. Starting maybe with one of these questions that we put up tonight. There's several others that we put out questions on Instagram on a regular basis for you to explore with your partner.
Great. I'm gonna put another couple together. This is a fun math question.
Nice.
Why did you choose 80-80, not 70-70, 90-90? And what does that say about that other 20%?
Yes.
And wanting my partner to be more romantic. And how do you weave that in?
Okay.
Let's do romance after.
Yeah. So for the 80-80, we're often asked this question, and a lot of people ask, why not 100-100? If you really want to be radically generous, give everything. Why hold anything back? And that's actually a trope out there in the sort of marriage world, 100-100. The reason we decided to go with 80-80, we thought that was helpful as a concept, is that radical generosity, if you're in this mindset of 50-50, it's a huge stretch to go from trying to make things fair to going to radically generous, right? So that's a good thing, but you can overdo radical generosity. It's kind of like stretching your hamstring. You want to hit the edge, but you don't want to go so far you actually pull your hamstring. And in marriage, what that looks like is going so far with radical generosity that you lose yourself. You lose your sense of purpose. You lose an attachment or connection to the things that matter to you. So we think that's also really important. And that's what ended it or led us to 80-80. And of course, the math is arbitrary to a certain extent. It's mostly just a way of shifting your thinking so that you can let go of that expectation of getting something back in return. I'll let you do how to make your man more romantic.
How to make my man more romantic.
Or
my partner.
Or your partner more romantic.
So I think this, in some ways, it connects back a little bit to space, that there's something profoundly unsexy about, hey, I've got 2 minutes, you ready for some romance? Whereas if there's a way that you can anticipate the evening, you can carve out a little bit of space, if there's any way, like as the world comes back a tiny bit to normal, get a babysitter, where there's just a chance where you get to go, wow, you used to be the most interesting person I knew. You still are. That there's some preamble, there's some foreplay, both in terms of the physical, but also just the connectivity between you and your partner. And if you become available, if you lead, I have been really pleasantly surprised by the stories that come back that people say somebody's got to go first. And if I'm willing to, very often my partner will meet me there.
Perfect. Okay. How do you get, this is rough. Some of these questions make me sad because people are struggling. And how do you get closer to your spouse when you really disagree on everything? Part one. Part two, the in-laws.
Oh,
My partner chooses his parents and his, over our family.
let's do thirds. Do the
Yeah,
second one
sure.
first,
Yeah,
and then
why
we'll
don't
do
you-
sinkholes and potholes.
Yeah.
So in the 80-80 marriage in the book, we devote a whole section to this idea of thirds. And it sounds to me like the way that these in-laws are being described, they're a third. Thirds are any person or any entity or any activity that really threatens that couple connectivity. So it could be, a parent that they're choosing over you and your relationship. It could be a friend. Really, the tool there is around first revealing your inner experience of the sadness that it creates, the disconnection that it creates, the downstream effects potentially for your kids that it creates, and then also creating some reasonable boundaries with your partner so that when that in-law calls and says, hey, I need you, or hey, can you come over, that there's an agreement between the two of you that they can say, hey, let me check with my partner first. It's not that the answer is no, it's not a stiff arm, but that it feels like you're a team engaging in how that relationship looks and feels.
Yeah. And then to the other question, there's a distinction we make in the book, which I think could be helpful here, between pothole and sinkhole problems. So pothole problems, they're disagreements that are relatively easy to navigate. We disagree on stuff all the time. Most of the time, it's very minor things. When are we going to leave for this trip or whatever, right? And through revealing, we're able to come back into connection. We're able to resolve the problem, or at least mitigate some of the effects of the problem. Now, there are other problems in marriage that are more like sinkholes that you can't just like drive your car over. In fact, you end up driving your car into it. So with those kinds of problems, the more you try to get out and the more you reveal, and try to talk it out, sometimes the deeper you get into the problem. And for those, I think it's essential to find the help of a couples therapist or a coach, rabbi, whoever it is in your life who can help you, but somebody outside of the system who can help the two of you navigate those problems. Because for many of us, we just can't do it alone. We need help.
Yeah.
I think that's we're a little bit over time, but I think that's a perfect place to move us into the community of mindful parenting breakout discussions. And truly, truly, thank you both for joining us and in this kickoff partnership with Detroit and Chicago and Seattle, which is really fantastic. And when we're going to go to the breakout sessions, we want everyone to just think about two questions. What resonated most for you with today's talk? And how can you take that idea and incorporate that into your partnership? So we're going to thank the Klemps and then move to our breakout sessions. The breakout rooms will open at 8:05, giving you just a couple minutes to take a break and join us back. And thank you again. Fantastic.
Thank you
truly.
so much.
Yeah, thank you for
What
having
a
us.
gift.
Thank
It was
you.
great.
Again, I just want to remind people that in the chat is the Zoom to move into the breakouts. Thank you.